some European Union funds were devoted to reconverting migration actors. So telling the drivers, well, just we can help you with a small loan, with a small funding to set up a different alternative. Bring in migrants. It's not legal anymore. It's not good. You're a criminal now. So some of these people were making a living out of this, carrying migrants, carrying even Nigerian citizens. Well, started to, let's say, how we can get our hands on some of this European funding. At least they are telling us to stop doing what we were doing. We need to feed our family. So they started to create a small organization to, fight human trafficking, for example. So the same people were bringing the people, from across the Sahara, and this activity was, happening in daylight. It was not considered as illegal. Then they saw this turn into, they were illegalized by European Union policies, and then they said, well, let's set up an organization and let's see if we can access to some of these funds. Most of the time it didn't work, basically. It was just very small, extremely small amount for extremely, so the people were unsatisfied, actually. And
sorry, I have to cut to my last question,
yes,
because I think we are somehow running out of time. And this would be my last question. Then if you guys have any questions that you want to ask, obviously you can come forward. And my last and final question is actually, what is currently the EU migration policy?
Yeah, thank you. So I will answer very briefly. So
yeah.
there is time, hopefully, for some
exactly, because that is the main opening. I think so that should be 6:15. I think we already passed that. But
yeah. So basically, I think the current migration policies by the EU, even if it's very complex, it's more complex than what I'm telling you. But it's so there are different pushes. Even inside the EU, there is someone trying to push for different policies. But basically, what's happening, it's that I think it's a short-sighted policy, which is considering mostly European priority and still kind of acting in a very colonial or neo-colonial fashion, so trying to impose our priority as Europeans to African citizens. And in different ways. And I think basically the reality, if we look at the reality of demographic, economy, social and political matter worldwide, it's really kind of a policy that can't work. It's only working in a very short run, but unluckily, the idea of an emergency, we've seen European migration crisis in 2015, that's how it has been labeled, not the African migration crisis, the European one. This idea of emergency is very useful for policymakers, which have a political gain out of this, and also for the industry, and sometimes also for international actors, for UN actors or NGOs, I would say, sadly, that are out of these policies are making some money and are continuing to exist and to justify their initiative and intervention. So I think it's really important, as I already said, as civil society, the media, also to look at what's happening. There are some initiatives also by journalists, by civil society groups across the EU, also across Africa, to build a bridge in order that we are collaborating, because what the EU is saying, we are doing an equal partnership with Africa, which is completely, most of the time, fake. I think we have the responsibility as journalists and civil society members to create this relation, which is to make things different.
That's a very, very vital concluding remark. It's a responsibility for everyone, especially as journalists and civil societies, to make sure that things are being put in place, because I think despite what Europeans or the European Union decide on their policies, I think the role of journalists and the civil societies also plays a role. On that note, thank you so very much for being with us in this 1 hour. If there is anyone who has a question, want to add anything, observation also can. I saw a hand there, Joy. Is there anyone that is giving a mic around, Anas? That somebody has
There's
a
a
question.
microphone here.
Yeah, there's
Thank
a
you.
microphone.
I think
Okay.
it's for the...
Thanks, Wax.
Hi, can you hear me? I think you can hear me now. Thank you so much for the presentation. That's really, really strong. I'm Joy Sense, and I'm founder of African Women in Europe. My question and also contribution, I've been observing the last slide that you have shared there. I'm more in the solution, the why is the migration for Africa being an issue. So the solutions that I'm seeing that have been given out on that slide looks really not solving any big issues. But there are 2 points there I have to say that was really, we need to find a solution, which are job creations. And the job creations, we need also to look at the Africa Continental Free Trade Area that has been launched in January, that is going to help a lot in this. So a lot of support need to go there. The second one is the awareness, and I like that you mentioned that. Awareness need to be put a lot, because being the founder of African Women in Europe, we actually wrote books. We have written 2 books now, saying how it is here, so that people can really understand how it is, whether we came with migration, whether we came through marriage or work. For people to understand, they need the collaboration of adding the diaspora themselves who came here into this package that is being contributed to get the solutions, because they're solutions. So my question for you is, where would the EU invest the best to solve the solution? Because you're a journalist, I'm sure you've done the research. Which is the areas you think that should be put more effort?
Thank you. So I'll go with this first question. Thank you very much. Well, I think, as you mentioned, now there is this new continental free trade area, which is gathering almost all African countries. It's and will be launched practically quite soon. It's already in the making. Let's say it was the agreement was the first agreement was signed 2 years ago. So it's and this will kind of also influence. Probably it will take a bit of time, the African economy, circulation of goods, and also help a sort of made in Africa market to be recognized within Africa. So not just importing goods from Europe or from China or from, but just that, you know, a car built in Ghana could be bought in the Central African Republic or in Congo, for example. While now it's basically impossible, kind of. Or clothes from Rwanda or Ethiopia can also circulate in West Africa. So it's a kind of major issue, I think. And I see there that the European Union role, it's quite controversial, because in words they're saying, we are a big supporter of the African Continental Free Trade Area. But in reality, they are afraid, because they are afraid of losing ground to, for example, to China, which is also investing a lot in trying to open up their own factories, which already are there in Africa, to benefit from this new, in the making, circulation of goods. And on the other hand, the other part of the story it's also, there's a process in the African Union for not only a commercial free trade area, but also a free movement area within Africa. And this is also something which I feel that for the EU and European leaders is problematic. They would like most of the time to have a sort of buffer zone in North Africa, so that people won't move ahead. And this is also creating problems. So I think, first of all, what the EU should do is to kind of really work on building what they call labeled the equal partnership. And so if this is relevant for us, so maybe just sometime more than doing something, I would say just not doing something, retire a bit and say, well, it's probably impossible if we look at how global politics work, and or maybe do things in different ways. I think, for example, as you said, employment is crucial. also putting up conditions. I think basically European Union should also be aware that they need also to be in touch, and policymakers with all this huge funding coming from the EU, they need to be in touch with the civil society in countries in Africa. Because the feeling I get every time I speak with members of the civil society in Africa, where, especially in countries where migration policies are so strict and so heavy somehow, have been imposed by Europe, is that, yeah, like, 10 years ago, we've seen Europe as a friend for the local civil society, for human rights defenders. Now, they prefer our governments to kind of, control border and close their eyes on violation of human rights, for example. So it's important also that this changes. Then I think it's kind of, sometimes it's, infrastructures are important as well, probably. I'm not a big fan of, development big infrastructures, but at the same time, having, electricity, internet connectivity is quite important today. But then also the EU is stressing a lot. If you read the last discussion that happened in the past months between European Union and African Union leaders, the meetings they had, the European Union new strategy for Africa, which is also in the making, they're stressing a lot on education, and I think that that's really crucial. But then practically, I don't see how this will happen. There's probably the small positive sign, but the overall architecture is still problematic, because the EU is afraid to lose ground at the same time to China, to Turkey, to Russia, and so it's also a responsibility. I mean, things could be done differently, but it's also responsibility of the local civil society and of us, of course, in Europe, who are aware of what is going on.
I think there lies a huge task ahead of us, as policymakers, journalists, civil societies, and you name them. So if there is any other question, you can raise your hands, but then please let's try to be a bit brief in asking questions and also brief in answering, because I think we're really behind time. There is, okay.
Hello, I have a question for EU fundraising. So from my understanding, it requires a lot of knowledge to just apply for funds. I've been researching that a little bit, like for NGOs. So have you ever researched that, like maybe the issue that for the civil society it's very hard to actually apply for EU funds, because it requires a lot of specific knowledge and language skills, and yes, so did you ever research that?
Yeah. Well,
maybe you can also tell us your name and where you're from, if you're
sorry.
answering the question.
My name is Kim, and I'm working for an NGO called Signal of Solidarity in North Rhine-Westphalia.
Thank you. Well, I haven't really studied this a lot, but I realize this. Of course, I have lots of friends and people I know who are in different countries in Africa, who are parts of local NGOs or civil society groups, and it's really difficult to apply for European Union funding. Most of the time you need to partner with the international NGO, and it's problematic. I think what is happening, what I see happening sometime is also like big, either European cooperation agencies or UN agencies, which are kind of contracting some very small parts of these huge programs to reduce migration on similar programs to local civil society groups, so that they can say, okay, we have a civil society participation. So I think it's also, and sometimes if you are a local NGO, this is the way you access some funding. You can have pay some of your staff, and there's no other way basically. But yeah, it's a kind of sort of civil society washing for politics, which are not really pro-civil society. When you kind of co-opt, I don't say this is the norm, but I saw this happening. Big UN agencies saying, okay, we are working with civil society, we have a program with civil society, but basically, yeah, civil society, local groups, they don't have a possibility maybe to be critical, even if they dislike the overall politics, and they said, well, we should have a better one. But then this is the way to get some funding. So I think, yeah, it will be important to move from this example to kind of building up, maybe connecting a European civil society group and organization which have a bit more means and capacity to understand how European Union funds are working with partners in Africa to build up projects, even if they're not the big projects which we maybe would make a real difference, but slowly it can turn out to be important.
Thank you. Do we have any other hand raised? Or
Yes, please. I can just one last question, very short, but
yeah.
My name is Wasil. Okay, please. My question is, there was a time you mentioned the routes from West Africa. You mentioned Niger something. I wanted to ask, have you been there yourself?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, he's a world versatile migration expert journalist. He's been to Nigeria. I mean, he's been to West Africa, let's say.
Some countries.
Have you been to Gambia, right?
I've been.
Yeah, because I saw you friends with some journalists, and I was like, okay. I think he's been to many countries, and you can read about his research. I mean, while I was doing research about you, I come across a lot of news article research on this migration, money spent, and so on. I was like, wow, okay. There is a lot going on that many people don't know. So.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you for taking the time to read all this very boring stuff.
Because I mean, I actually have to take my time when I read your profile, and I was like, okay, I think I am going to sit with an international, well-experienced journalist. I have to be prepared. So I have to read every article I come across. It takes me time, but it's worth it because I learned myself a lot. Is there any other question? Okay, I have 1, 2, 3.
Hello, my name is Yusuf. I'll make it very short. I think as a non-European, the whole time when I'm listening to this, I'm hearing about Europe and its policies and the migration policies. But we really forget to mention why those people like me wanted to immigrate. What is the reason behind this? Like these governments who are completely corrupted, and there is a huge, I come from a country where people ask European funders not to give the money to the government, but to give it to European NGOs because they have no trust in the government, because the government already took them there. So there's this huge as well conflict there. And I recently heard things that were completely wrong to say, but people, for example, in Lebanon now, they're wishing for being colonized again. Because everyone wants to immigrate to Europe because they see all this freedom, which is part of it is true. We are sitting here today and talking about this with all the freedom and stuff. So it's important, I think, to focus a lot on why the people are really leaving, the governments, all this corruption, all that. Just a thought.
I just want to add something, and this could have been a question, but however, I don't know how it skipped. How are this fund being utilized? Here is also a big question, because I think one of the mistakes I would call it is that what European policymakers do is by directly giving funds to African leaders, because at the end we all know where it ends, in their pockets, to their own. Most of them are corrupt. So I think it's wise enough, and if you tell them, they'll tell you, yeah, it has to do with policies, politics, relations, bilaterals, and so on. But I think it's much more wise enough if they give it to NGOs, to the individuals that are affected. Like, for example, IMO has a big presence in most of these West African countries. And if a returnee returns back, has an amount. And sometimes you don't even know that as a returnee there is a money. Because I personally spoke to some that have been returned and said, do you know you have such an amount from IMO? They'd be like, oh, I didn't know. I only got 50 euros from the airport. So it's quite interesting.
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Nima, thank you. I think this is really also an important point to show how it's complex, because, the issue of corruption. And I was thinking also, when European policymakers, donors, are saying, okay, with these funds we are going to tackle the root causes of irregular migration. Actually, the root causes lie in corruption, lie in also these practices like of exploitation by European companies, which are more interested in extracting oil, for example, or from Iraq or from Libya or from Nigeria, than in civil society there, or human rights, or local development. So what's driving the politics at a quite high level is basically the economical interest of big companies which are influencing the governments. And these sometimes are the root causes. Or land grabbing, it's a big phenomenon. Who is buying lands all over Africa? Not only the Chinese, but France, but Canada, but lots of countries, because they want to profit from this new industrial agriculture. So,
sorry, I have to cut you short. I've been signaled twice that we don't have time. So we have two more questions. I just want to take that, and at the end we can do discussions among us.
But
so we just take the last two, and then we close there. Please make sure that the answer and the questions are brief. Then we close.
All right, thank you. My name is Benedictus Agbalom, and I'm from Migrant Media Network, an NGO. So my question is, why do we always do not put in the role of the diaspora in telling the migration story? Because you mentioned in your submission that there is this phase where you take a picture by a car and you post it online, right? So this is something that actually misinform people back home in regards to when they want to migrate. It changes their narrative on their thought processes, on what the life they should expect there and what is ahead of them. And I think that smart migration could be a way to curb irregular migration. I don't know your take on that, but it could also be a managed migration process with the smart migration.
Do we take the last question, then you answer both at once, then we close there?
My name is Malik. I'm from Italy, and Black Malik Show is my show. Basically, this one is, how do I say it? It's not a question, but I want to know what you think about this. Do you think the diaspora, like Africans in diaspora, are not participating much in developing Africa?
Thank you. So it will be very short.
Yeah. Plus the closing remark, then we close
I
it
think, well, this is what you're saying is very important, because in many countries, I think, for example, Nigeria, a big country, remittances from the diaspora, from Nigerians abroad, are much higher than European migration funds. So, of course, for the Nigerian population, it's more important that the diaspora exists, and people in the diaspora are able to send money back home in an efficient way without losing much money in taxes, which are kept by different collectors along the way. So also facilitating remittances should be really important in this kind of policies. And I think also, because it connects with the previous question, diaspora, I don't see it really involved. I see, in discussing these policies at the European level, especially, maybe at the national level, I don't know exactly. For example, in Italy, there's a diaspora forum, which is gathering together, which is a sort of consultative forum, which can provide some indication for policymakers in Italy on how to run development projects in countries like in Africa or in Asia, and sometimes the same organizations in the diaspora are able to access some of this funding, not only just to give in their idea. It's a beginning, it's not enough. I think it's important that this relation changes, and also it has a lot to do with the idea that these policies are top-down most of the time. So even when they say, okay, there is a civil society open debate around how to frame a policy. But actually, yeah, maybe they have a consultation and some organization can say, well, we don't like this, we like this, but then in the end it's really top down. So it must be something which is really part of how policies are decided. And yeah, I think it's something that also, I think it will be also very important if, as a journalist, that we are having in Europe more and more, unfortunately in Italy it's very, very limited, more and more journalists of African origin, African descent, who can change the narrative within Europe as well. And also, and
it's not easy to get to tap into European media houses as a black African. I'll close it on the role of diaspora on migration, like colleagues said, on smart migration. So you made mention of some people will take pictures with a nice car that doesn't even belong to them. Some people will go in a big house and take pictures when they sleep at asylum houses. To close on that, I think we're making a big mistake. I think the role of diaspora is much more vital in that. I think we should be doing more awareness creation. We should actually be talking about the realities in Europe instead of posting pictures on Facebook or influencing potential migrants from Africa to migrate. But then the European policy decision makers, when they are at their making decisions, I think they should also consider not just on political influences, bilateral relationships, and whatever power they might think, but also think of the individual. On that note, I will close it here. That was on the tracking EU funding migration, where does the money goes, who decide, and with what impact. My name is Nima Jadama, originally from the Gambia. With me is Giacomo, an international freelance journalist and expert in migration. I hope it was as interesting as I found it myself. Thank you so very much.